After sending Zero away, Oberlin fell silent for a moment. It was due to cowardice and fear, he said slowly. That to reclaim the glory of the witches after defeating the demon, Acris decreed that only the transcendent witches should ascend to the throne. But transcendent witches were extremely rare, and over time, some remarkable ordinary witches took on the role of the Pope. Fearful that one day they might face retribution from those oppressed witches, the mortal archbishop directly usurped the position. Oberlin intently told Maine that this secret must be kept within his heart. As for the other parts of history, Maine will come to know them in Illusion Chamber. Oberlin said even if Maine decide to let go of the Pope position, it could also be a good decision. Maine didn't quite grasp the weight of Oberlin's words, but he noticed that Oberlin's breath was fading, his eyes slowly closing. In the final moments, Maine thought he heard an apology, a whispered, "I'm sorry." In the border town, Agatha dressed up and, after breakfast, accompanied Wendy to Roland's office. Roland first inquired about Agatha's well-being and how she felt about the breakfast. Instead of replying immediately, Agatha studied the prince. For the first time, she found herself unable to read a mere mortal. Roland suggested that Agatha could tour the town with Nightingale or inquire Scroll about the books she might want to read. Shaking her head, Agatha showed no interest in these offerings. All she wanted to know was how Roland planned to prove that ordinary people could defeat the demon. Roland shrugged. Besides heavy industry, light industry, and people's livelihoods are also important. He don't know why Agatha so interested in cannons. Agatha frowned, once again confronted with unfamiliar terms. Roland chuckled, offering no explanation, but promised to show her the latest weaponry in the afternoon. Before, Roland had wanted to ask about the daily lives of the people in the holy city of Takira from 450 years ago, such as what they ate. Agatha was taken aback by such a question, not expecting him to be curious about such matters. She explained that she never paid attention to what ordinary people ate. As for the guards and servants in her tower, they were provided with 3 meals a day. Apart from the month of the demons, they would have meat once a week. When the topic of wages came up, Agatha remarked, mortals serving her and dedicate their lives to her. In return, she provide them with shelter and food, and impart knowledge to them. She felt there was no need to offer them any additional wages. Roland's curiosity grew as he listened. After those initial questions, he moved on to inquire about Agatha's knowledge of magic power and magic stones. Agatha explained that magic stones originated from the god punishment stones. However, their research on this topic cost them a lot of time and effort. To gain more insights, Roland would have to exchange it with knowledge that could increase the chances of a witch's awakening. Roland agreed. Tilly showed Agatha her flying magic stone and asked why they chose to walk when they had access to such stones. Agatha explained that while they understood magic power and magic stones, they couldn't manufacture the stones themselves. She went on to reveal that the stones were a creation of the demons. Within the demon species, there exists a peculiar kind they refer to as the Chaos Beast. Once these creatures consume a god punishment stone, they can produce various magic stones. They had once captured one alive. Although it continuously produced magic stones, they didn't know how to care for it properly, and the Chaos Beast died after just 6 months. Common demons also use magic stones in combat, Agatha explained. The type of stone that Tilly possesses likely belongs to one of the more powerful demon leaders. When Roland asked if the demons had always had these stones, Agatha rolled her eyes, telling him, if what Roland implying were true, humans would have been annihilated long ago. During the First Divine War, most demons didn't wield magic stones. They relied on their enormous strength, donned heavy iron armor, and attacked human cities with iron spears. This is well documented in historical records. The war raged on for centuries. Ultimately, humans were defeated and retreated to the plains. By the time of the Second Divine War, the demons' tactics had evolved significantly. That war only lasted 35 years before they were thoroughly defeated, largely due to the vast disparity in numbers. As to how these demons reproduced, Agatha admitted she didn't know. However, she did know that demons cannot survive outside of the red mist. The flying and other beasts of the demons, however, didn't require this mist for survival. Upon being shown a photograph by Roland, after hearing their encounter, Agatha recognized the presence of demons in the forest. She suddenly stood up, her voice trembling with excitement, saying those were squat stone towers. They are devices to produce and store the red mist. She wanted to attack the demon camp. Upon hearing the proposition to launch an offensive attack against the demons, the witches inhaled sharply in surprise. Agatha said, "If there are watcher demons in place for surveillance, it's guaranteed that there is a chaos beast within the camp. Otherwise, a small outpost in such a remote location, nestled between mountains and sea, wouldn't deploy rare high-ranking demons for protection." Roland recalled the highly corrosive nature of the red mist and how they couldn't get close to it. Agatha clarified, "The red mist is only effective against witches. Ordinary humans, animals, and plants can survive beneath it, and flames can accelerate its dispersal." Agatha stated bluntly, this could be an opportunity for Roland to show her firsthand how mortals can win over demons. Pointing at Tilly, she suggested, Roland could use the flying witches to distract the flying beasts. Roland chuckled, shaking his head, telling her that last reconnaissance wasn't carried out by flying witches but by a hot air balloon. This transportation tool can only accommodate about 10 people and isn't suitable for transporting soldiers. Furthermore, Agatha's plan isn't foolproof. They don't know the number of enemies they are facing, and he don't want to see casualties. A wave of irritation washed over Agatha. She thought to herself, how could there possibly be a perfect plan when battling demons? How could there not be casualties? This prince is undoubtedly deceiving her. Only someone who's never experienced the brutality of war would be so concerned about the life and death of their troops. Although she felt disappointed, Agatha managed to keep her emotions in check. She kept these thoughts to herself, deciding to reserve her judgment until after seeing the new weapons. However, her hope in Roland had greatly diminished, and she didn't harbor much expectation for these new weapons. A prince who only knew of battles from books, a group of supporting witches, and frail, powerless mortals, how could they ever defeat the demon? She slowly took a seat. When asked why they named the war against the demon invaders the Divine War, Agatha responded with a hint of desolation. The annals don't document the reason for the war's name, but that's what everyone calls it, she then continued, revealing that the demons came through the stone gates, also known as the gates of hell, rising from the depths of the earth. According to the annals, every time the blood-red moon descends, the gates of hell would open. In any case, these stone gates open once every few centuries. Roland clapped his hands, encouraging everyone to stay optimistic. They now had a general understanding of the demon. He opened the office door, suggesting everyone take a break for lunch first. A surge of irritation bubbled up in Agatha's heart as she fiercely cut into the meat on her plate. She was immensely displeased with the prince's luxurious lifestyle, indulging in gourmet food even during times of war. This only fueled her anger more. It was a mix of resenting her inability to resist the allure of delicious food and her frustrations towards Roland. When she saw Roland leave alone after his meal, Wendy explained, "His Highness is taking his afternoon nap. It's his usual routine. He always says that maintaining one's health is of utmost importance and ensures he gets adequate rest." Agatha grew even more angry, thinking that it was just an excuse for laziness. Agatha couldn't fathom why all the witches here placed such unwavering trust in this prince. Did they truly believe that he could defeat the demon and the so-called church? Wendy softly replied that she wasn't certain about the thoughts of the other sisters, but she believed in His Highness. Because Roland can turn things others can't even dare to imagine into reality. Wendy reminisced about Roland rescuing witches, establishing a town where witches and ordinary people coexisted harmoniously, leading commoners against the demonic beasts. Also defeating a duke with territories several times larger than his own, and even triumphing over Timothy's vast army. Agatha countered, claiming these are mere mortal conflicts, incomparable to the God Punishment Army and the demons. Wendy shook her head gently, "It's not just that. Roland imparted knowledge and ideals that evolved the abilities of 4 witch sisters. Roland not only created machines of immense power but also weapons that enable ordinary people and knight to overcome even extraordinary witches. And as these miracles unfurled daily around Wendy, her eyes twinkled with mirth, yet her voice brimmed with conviction. She firmly believed that one day, Roland will become the king of Grey Castle, leading them to a brighter future. After Wendy left, Agatha was lost in thought for a long while until Nightingale appeared at the door, inviting her to witness the trial of a new weapon. Seeing Prince Roland, who looked drowsy and was yawning, Agatha had a sudden urge to splash a handful of icy slush on his face to wake him up. But she held it in. As they left the castle, it was her first time seeing the full view of the town in daylight. The town was remarkably orderly, even Takara's inner city couldn't boast such neatness and organization. After all, it was just a small town, Agatha thought dismissively and snorted. Turning to Nightingale, she asked, "How many people live here?" Nightingale pondered a bit and said, "It used to be 2,000, but now it's close to 30,000. Agatha initially only heard the 2,000 part and thought Roland was planning to use such a number to fight the demons. But hearing the figure jump to 30,000 made her eyes widen in surprise. How could such a small place house 30,000 residents? Agatha remembered when the population of the Holy City exceeded a certain threshold, the city's demands would multiply. First was the sharp increase in food and water needs, followed by the expansion of slums leading to a deterioration of public order. Having experienced this firsthand, she knew the challenges of expanding a city's population. She thought Nightingale might be misleading her and decided to seek clarity from Wendy. Walking through the bustling streets, Agatha followed the prince and others to climb a segment of the city wall made of mud. Her disappointment deepened. Soldiers saluted Roland, and as they walked along the wall, Agatha soon saw the object of the trial. The weapon's design was quite peculiar. It was a long, metallic cylindrical object. Apart from its fixed stand, there were two shorter tubes attached above and below the main body. She couldn't fathom how it would be used to attack enemies. Roland announced, "This is the latest weapon of Border Town, the emblem of justice and glory, the 152mm Fortress Standard Cannon." Agatha couldn't help but frown. Justice and glory? Fortress Standard? The terms sounded frivolous. The subsequent explanations seemed to be full of crap, forcefully coined terms. Was this truly the knowledgeable Prince Wendy spoke of, who was deeply trusted by the witches? After his speech only Nightingale clapped, making the atmosphere momentarily awkward. Roland cleared his throat and signaled Axe to begin the test fire. Agatha watched intently, not missing a single movement. Roland motioned for everyone to cover their ears. Just as Agatha was about to ask why, an explosive boom sounded next to her. A ringing echoed in her ears as silence surrounded her. The metallic tube emitted an orange-red flame. Nightingale supported her from behind. Agatha looked at the open snowy field ahead but saw no change. Looking puzzled at Roland, Roland explained that the weapon could launch shells, or she could think of them as giant crossbow bolts, to strike distant enemies. There were flags placed at intervals of 1,000 meters, the farthest one being 5,000 meters away. Roland converted the distances using ancient measurements, leaving Agatha stunned. Unfortunately, 5,000 meters was too far for them to see where the shell landed. He then prepared for a rapid-fire demonstration. When the cannon fired a second time, Agatha was prepared and had covered her ears. What she saw next was incredible. The prince was not lying, the weapon indeed fired projectiles, and at a speed that was impossible to track with the naked eye. She saw explosions in the distance. Gazing at the long-barreled weapon, Agatha was mesmerized. When asked if it was a weapon made by witches, Roland said it was a combined effort of witches and ordinary folks. Agatha felt a crack in her long-held beliefs. Had the Federation been wrong all along? Was what the prince said true? When Tilly saw the new weapon, she was equally astonished. Ashes and Andrea were perplexed about how the weapon could generate such immense power. Tilly felt they had been left far behind in technological advancements, which left her slightly despondent. Seeing the painstakingly assembled ammunition get depleted so quickly, Roland felt a pang of pain in his heart. Still, he had to maintain an enigmatic demeanor to hide his reluctance. The firing process went smoothly, and the results were encouraging, at least judging by Agatha's stunned expression. The cannon's performance surpassed her expectations. However, for Roland, the cannon was far from satisfactory. There were still many technicalities to be refined, particularly the weapons chamber was too small, leading to less than ideal range. After dinner, Roland awaited Tilly in his office. He wanted to discuss their strategy for the upcoming Third Divine War and their shared future. Pouring a cup of tea, Roland handed it to Tilly. Accepting the tea, she blinked, seemingly waiting for him to continue. Roland hoped Tilly can continue saying the strength of the demons is unpredictable. They need to gather all the power they can to have a chance at winning this war. He then mentioned her about the weapon they saw earlier that were capable of defeating the demons. Taking a sip of her tea, Tilly remained silent for a long time. Though Roland tried to maintain a calm face, Roland anxiously awaited her response. Finally, breaking the silence, Tilly asked, if she were to stay, what will happen to the witches back on Slumbering Isle? Suppressing his excitement, Roland said, bring them all to Border Town. He can allocated land specifically for Slumbering Isle witches. They'd still be led by Tilly. He didn't care if those witches couldn't fight for him. He believed support witches could play a significant role. Tilly seemed tempted by the generous offer, keen on both fighting the demons and pursuing her academic interests. However, she expressed concern about the independence of the Slumbering Isle witches. If they relocate to the western regions and a conflict arises, the witches would be defenseless. Before Roland could protest, saying it will never happen. Tilly cut him off, emphasizing the precariousness of relying solely on verbal assurances. She posed a question that left Roland stumped. If the roles were reversed, would Roland simply entrust everything to an ally based on words alone? Roland hesitated. The answer was clear. He wouldn't easily trust anyone either. In a last attempt, Roland confessed, Tilly is his sister. He won't harm her. With a painful expression, Tilly closed her eyes, trying to wave off the terrible memories. For now, she only wanted to remain ally while support Border Town's development to the best of her abilities. After Tilly's departure, Nightingale appeared. Sitting atop the desk, she remarked, she didn't expect someone who wouldn't be swayed by Roland's words. Roland knew Tilly wasn't entirely convinced. Their relationship had always been tense. But Nightingale was curious about Roland's past antics in the royal palace. As he recounted tales of his mischievous youth, Nightingale commented on how terrible he had been, but also how Tilly didn't seem to despise him now. Teasingly, she added, if the Slumbering Isle witches join them and there are more witches like ashes around, she'll be too busy. Not everyone is as cute and obedient as Maisie. Perhaps it was just Roland's imagination, but Nightingale seemed quite pleased with the evening's outcome. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Much to Roland's surprise, for it was nearly midnight, the one who pushed open the door was Agatha. Agatha learned from Wendy that all of Roland's knowledge, be it about firearms or cannons, was documented in books. Upon hearing this, Roland took out 2 books, telling Agatha that they contained the principles but not the crafting methods. They were merely introductory textbooks. Agatha then inquired again, confirming that only members of the Witch Union could study these materials. She expressed her desire to join the Witch Union. Roland, somewhat curious, remarked that the Witch Union was an organization specific to the border town and that the lord of this small town was just a mere mortal. Agatha lowered her gaze, saying that if weapons can be crafted potent enough to counter demons, while keeping the witches safe and also not in conflict with the Federation, she wouldn't mind collaborating with a mortal. She hesitated for a moment, perhaps finding it a bit difficult to say to serve Roland. Roland had initially thought Agatha would accompany Tilly to the Slumbering Isle. However, Agatha declared she no longer wished to flee, she hoped to witness victory right here. After a pause, Roland said he couldn't ensure they wouldn't be at odds with the Federation. Roland, suspecting the Federation might not have disbanded but rather rebranded and gone underground. Based on the information Agatha provided about their escape from Takira, Roland deduced that when the Federation, with their transcendent witch leading and a group of saintly warriors, migrated here, they shouldn't have gone unnoticed. He suspected the Church might be the new face of the Federation. He doubted that mere mortals could wrest control from witches, suggesting instead that the Federation witches might have turned the Federation into an organization that hunts their own, making it easier to mass-produce the God punishment soldiers. Agatha listened in disbelief to Roland's words, though Roland mentioned it was only a hypothesis. Retrieving 2 hefty books from the bookshelf, he presented her with chronicles penned by the Church itself and the annals of the 4 great kingdoms documented by astrologers, suggesting Agatha give them a read. With utmost seriousness, Roland stated that the Church must be eradicated at all costs. If Agatha was willing to stand by his side against the demons, he would welcome her into the Witch Union. The following day, in the back garden, Agatha showcased her powers. Scroll documented her ability, which was to generate cold, which, after evolving, allowed her to solidify objects even at room temperature. When questioned about the evolution of her powers, Agatha shared how she'd continually tried to chill water more rapidly. Until a particular scene she saw led to her epiphany that everything existed in 3 states: gas, liquid, and solid. This realization of hers was then recorded in the universal laws. Upon Roland's inquiry about what the universal laws were, Agatha was taken aback by his apparent lack of surprise. Roland commented on the ubiquitous presence of gases in the world, adding it was a regular occurrence. He mentioned there were different gases, each with unique boiling and melting points, all of which were common knowledge in the books. A sudden weight pressed on Agatha's chest. Pouting, she explained that the universal laws documented the insights and journeys of high-order awakeners as their powers evolved. Roland once again welcomed Agatha and subsequently assigned her to the alchemy workshop. During lunch, Roland pondered on the large-scale production of nitroglycerin. The most crucial step was temperature control. If the temperature of a large reaction container could be maintained, nitroglycerin could be produced safely in large batches. However, he wasn't entirely sure if this approach was feasible. At the dining table, he shared lunch with Margaret. She assumed Roland's concern was due to the high costs of transporting refugees, causing him to be distressed. Roland waved off the idea, expressing that his mind was on something else and conveyed his gratitude for everything Margaret had done. After slowly finishing her soup, Margaret regretfully mentioned she might not be able to visit the border town as often the next year. She explained that Timothy had issued an order prohibiting the trade of saltpeter. This revelation made Roland puzzled. According to the information Margaret had gathered from City Hall, the royal capital seemed to be planning a comprehensive blockade and sanctions on the western regions. It wasn't just saltpeter, even merchants might be stopped at Crimson Water City. This would not only affect Border Town, but also Changji Stronghold and Willowtown would be impacted. Although many nobles were against it, Timothy had no intention of retracting the order. Thus, Margaret probably wouldn't be able to visit Border Town next year. Roland realized he had pushed Timothy to the brink, but trade was the Achilles heel of Border Town. Currently, the municipal treasury held a limited amount of gold. And saltpeter, essential for the mass production of acid, was in short supply. This would cause significant delays in the weapons upgrade. If no merchants came to Border Town, its economy would collapse. Standing up, Roland spoke to Margaret, assuring her that this situation wouldn't last long. The next time she visited, she would see an entirely transformed city. Margaret looked at him, somewhat surprised. Roland explained that once the month of the demon concluded, he would establish a direct trade route connecting to the fjord. He invited Margaret to be part of it. Margaret, with evident curiosity, pointed out that there seemed to be no good port here that led to the sea. Roland replied, "Not now, but he can build one." He planned to set up a port in the southern part of Border Town, leveling the coastal ridges to facilitate the transportation of goods from the Western Territory. Roland hoped Margaret would provide ships to handle the transport and sales. Soon, Roland had his guards bring in the newest products of Border Town. A guard entered, presenting a plate filled with transparent crystal bottles. Margaret, driven by curiosity, uncorked one and sniffed. Her eyes instantly lit up. It was perfume. She examined the bottle from every angle, clearly enamored. Compared to the products from the royal capital, this perfume seemed even more fragrant. Generously, Roland gifted Margaret several bottles. When she inquired about the annual production capacity, Roland mentioned it could be tenfold that of the royal capital. However, internally, Roland knew that with Leaf and Evelyn, he could produce even more. But rarity adds value. He hoped Margaret could act as an agent to sell these goods. Margaret agreed without hesitation. She was well aware of the golden opportunity in front of her. Outside the window, the snow grew heavier, large flakes as big as fingernails fell from the sky. Looking out, the town was covered by snow. In a room, Tilly, Anna, and Agatha sat close together, enjoying the warmth of the charcoal fire, discussing and learning fascinating new information. When Agatha asked Tilly what Roland was like before, Tilly hesitated for a moment. Then said he was arrogant and timid, also very obstinate. Overall, he had a terrible character, she said with a hint of complaint. Even after coming here and showing some improvement, it's still hard to guess what's on his mind. The room went silent. Tilly felt the strange gaze of the other two. Anna chuckled, indicating that it was the first time she'd heard Tilly speak like that. Realizing she had spoken too freely, Tilly felt she had been impolite, especially coming from an ally. Perhaps she had been too relaxed recently. Before Tilly could explain herself, Anna waved her off with a smile, saying the prince wouldn't mind such words. Anna reasoned that Roland probably had his own difficulties and past regrets. Tilly was surprised, as Roland never discussed these things with Anna. Anna added that she never asked and believed that if Roland wanted to share, he would. From their conversation, Agatha inferred that Roland had changed significantly from his past self. There were rumors in the Exploration Society that the more extraordinary a person, the more peculiar habits they might possess. Such a transformation in Roland might be seen as a normal phenomenon. Agatha asked if Roland ever howled at the moon in the royal palace or stared at walls for a long time. Tilly shook her head, saying that other than acting somewhat eccentrically, he was no different from ordinary people. However, she had heard stories of him proclaiming in a court lesson that he wanted to marry a witch. Likely, because of this, both his elder brothers and his father began to dislike him. Agatha mentioned that marrying a witch was a grand ideal in Takira. Tilly clarified that times were different 400 years ago. If he married a witch, he wouldn't have an heir to inherit everything. It was unthinkable for a prince. Tilly sighed, hoping that after all this time, Roland had forgotten about the foolish things he'd once said. Anna suddenly spoke up, but the prince still wants to marry a witch. Upon hearing this, both of them widened their eyes in surprise. Petrov got up from the bed. The woman beside him turned over, her sleepy eyes fluttering open, telling him it was too early. She exhaled warmly by Petrov's ear, coaxing him to stay with her a bit longer. As Petrov got dressed, he explained he had official duties to attend to. The woman reached out, looping an arm around his waist, reminding him, even if Roland has taken Changji's stronghold, Petrov is in control here. Petrov fondly patted her head, replying, "But His Highness is the true lord of the Western territories." Outside, the biting cold air reminded him of a journey he made a year ago, when he had braved a snowstorm, sailing to the border town to deliver a threat letter from Changji's stronghold on behalf of Duke Ryan. And now, he was on his way to the border town again. As he walked through the outer city district, heading for the docks, a commotion from a street corner drew his attention. Distinct shouts of "demon" and "hang her" pierced the air. Petrov sent a knight beside him to investigate. It didn't take long for the knight to control the scene. 2 children and an elderly woman were kneeling on the ground. The children's clothes were ragged, making them appear all the more pitiable in the biting cold. The old woman suddenly pointed at a red-haired girl, accusing her as a demon and telling Petrov, "This girl has become a witch." A blond boy stood in front of the girl, his posture aggressive as if ready to pounce, his face covered with fresh bruises. He shouted, "Witches aren't minions of demons." Petrov disregarded the boy, addressing the old woman, asking her how is she sure that the girl is a witch. The elderly woman went on, urging Petrov to hang the girl. Growing impatient, Petrov demanded the full story. Reluctantly, the old woman explained that she was a follower of the church, waiting for the holy city of Hermes to send a new priest and rebuild the Western Church in Changji stronghold. By chance, she had witnessed the red-haired girl using magic to remove snow from the rooftops of local homes. In her recount, the old woman constantly lamented the absurd teachings of Roland and the theater's twisted performances such as the witch diary that muddled right from wrong. After listening, Petrov instructed his knights to take the elderly woman for further interrogation and to arrest all the followers associated with her before his return. Before the woman could protest further, a knight silenced her with a sharp slap. Petrov then turned his attention to the terrified young girl, asking her to demonstrate her abilities. The blond boy once again stepped up to protect the girl. Falling to her knees, she showed no immediate response, evidently frightened. Petrov continued, stating that if she could prove herself a true witch, he would provide her shelter. Hesitantly, she stretched out her hands into the snow, forming a snowball. Slowly, the snowball melted into water in her hands. Petrov reached for the young girl, telling her to accompany him. When she lifted her head to ask where they were going, he smiled and told her, "A place suitable for a witch." An attendant beside him gently lifted the girl, continuing their journey towards the dock. The blond boy tried to rush forward but was held back by several knights. His shouts gradually faded into the distance. Aboard the ship, Petrov draped a coat over the girl and served her a bowl of hot porridge. The girl introduced herself as Paper, a street urchin. She took a sip of the porridge and burned her tongue, but eventually managed to finish the warm meal. When Petrov inquired about the boy who had defended her, Paper revealed his name was Snake Fong, and he often brought food for them. She expressed her hopes that Petrov wouldn't capture him. Paper then shared her story. Knowing that people no longer feared witches as they once did, she used her powers to clear the accumulated snow from residents' rooftops in exchange for food. However, she had only cleared snow from 3 houses. One household drove her away, while the other 2 provided her with some food. At the 4th house, she encountered the old woman. Petrov patted her head gently, advising Paper to rest well. He promised to bring her more food later in the evening. He added, in 3 days, she'll be able to meet His Highness. Several days later, the ship docked at the border town. Petrov, escorted by guards, entered the castle. Roland welcomed Petrov's arrival, and in turn, Petrov greeted Roland with a respectful bow. After taking a seat, Roland revealed the reason for summoning Petrov. It concerned a matter of utmost importance, one that would shape the future of the entire Western territory, including the Changji stronghold. Petrov's expression grew serious. Roland presented a blueprint to him, detailing his plans to build a city on this land. With methodical precision, Roland explained his vision. Within the vast boundaries of this city and its lands, a singular set of laws would govern all which is overseen by the newly established city hall. No noble, regardless of their rank, would be permitted to meddle in the affairs of the city. Petrov felt a jolt of recognition in his heart. He had harbored a similar idea a year ago, but Duke Ryan had dismissed it. The fact that Roland was sharing this with him now indicated that the decision had been made, and no one would be able to stand in his way. Petrov realized that his primary objective at this point was to find a way to ensure his interests were secured in the midst of this change. Subsequently, Petrov inquired, if the 5 major families are restricted from involving themselves in the city's affairs, how can his family serve and support Roland? Roland seemed somewhat taken aback by the question but was appreciative of Petrov's proactive attitude. He took a sip of his tea before replying, as long as Petrov's family is willing to accept his governance, he can continue to assist Roland in managing the Changji stronghold. Petrov quickly responded, whether it's him or his father, they have always followed Roland's will. Roland interrupted him, clarifying, he was not referring to individuals but to territories. Any noble families that seeks his protection will have their territorial governing rights revoked. Whether it's laws, law enforcement, or any other policies, everything will be based on the ordinances issued by the City Hall. Petrov hesitated for a moment. Roland continued, the territories can still be passed down from generation to generation, including their noble titles. They are still free to manage various industries and own businesses. These industries and lands will belong to their family, and no one will infringe upon them. The territories they possess remain unchanged compared to before. In fact, under the stimulus of the new policy, they might even flourish even more. Petrov didn't provide an immediate answer. After excusing himself, Nightingale appeared, asking Roland whether if he think Petrov will agree. Roland took a sip of his warm tea. He was not certain. Petrov has to persuade his father first. If they don't agree, it would be very regrettable. Nightingale knew Roland was fond of Petrov. Among the nobles, Petrov wasn't narrow-minded and always seized opportunities. He was also very adept at doing business and trade. Nightingale hopped off the table, not wishing to dwell on this topic any longer. The new witch will arrive soon. She will call Wendy over. For security reasons, and under Scroll's suggestion, the Witch Union decided that every time they received a foreign witch, Nightingale should first verify the newcomer's identity by discerning any of their lies. Roland couldn't be present during this, as the witches didn't carry God punishment stone with them. There was always the risk that a newcomer might lash out unexpectedly, causing unintended harm. Roland found this protocol a bit amusing, but understanding the witch's good intentions, he decided to comply. Leaving the office, he returned to his office and immediately summoned Barav, the chief administrator of the city hall. Barav was surprised that Roland wanted to recruit witches with a monthly salary of 1 gold. Roland explained that this salary was on par with other top professional positions, and by offering it, he was not just giving them a wage but also affirming their status here in the western region. Barav inquired why Roland didn't mobilize the people to seek out witches, just like how he did with the spies. Roland replied that he didn't want to mimic the church's methods, he hoped the witches would come forward willingly. Just as Barav was taking his leave with a bow, Wendy entered swiftly, informing Roland that the identity of the new witch had been verified. Roland chuckled, commenting that they were being overly cautious. Wendy firmly replied that such prudence was necessary, emphasizing that Roland's personal safety was their top priority. Roland was deeply moved and instructed Wendy to bring in the new witch. The girl was about 15 or 16 years old, with dirt-matted red hair, and her eyes radiated timidity and panic. For a moment, Roland was at a loss for words. According to the records, she called herself Paper, born on the outskirts of the Changji stronghold. She became an orphan after a heavy snowstorm 3 years ago. Roland knew that she was still in a state of shock and would likely need a significant amount of time to adjust to her new life. He looked to Wendy and told her to first give the girl a bath, let her rest for a while, and ensure she had a good meal. Wendy bowed in acknowledgement and then led the girl away. Steam wafted in waves from the tub inside the bathroom. Wendy once again relished the joy of being an elder sister. Without the disguise of clothes, the girl's frail body covered in wound and malnutrition was laid bare before Wendy's eyes. Fortunately, she was a witch, and with proper care, she would recover in no time. After cleaning herself, it was time for a delightful bath. Wendy tested the water temperature before gently placing the girl into the tub. The girl, Paper, had awakened her powers 2 years ago. Wendy explained to her knowledge about witches and magic. Holding her close, Wendy reassured her that everything would be all right once she settled in the border town. Suddenly, the bathroom door burst open. Lily, with a towel in hand, rushed in, pulling a puzzled Rem behind her. Lily leaned over the tub's edge, curiously staring at Paper, startling her. Wendy introduced them gently, saying, "Rem and Lily are witches from the border town." When they first arrived, they were just as apprehensive as Paper. Especially Rem, who was quite timid. When asked about Paper's abilities, she softly responded that she could melt snow. Paper couldn't turn water back into ice, but she could rapidly cool hot water. Lily fetched a basin of hot, bubbly water and prompted Paper to demonstrate her skill. The girl cautiously dipped her hand into the basin. In moments, the steaming surface cooled, and the bubbles dissipated, leaving the water clear and transparent. Petrov once again visited Roland's office. After bowing respectfully, he expressed his desire to serve Roland, and so did his family. Roland was immediately in high spirits. Petrov candidly spoke of the remarkable transformation he had witnessed in Border Town over the past few days, stating it was the kind of city he also envisioned. He hoped to see his own territory thrive similarly and wished for his family to join this new city. Roland was slightly moved by these words. Petrov planned to return to the stronghold to convey this to his father. Roland told Petrov that there were the other 4 major families and all the nobles of the Western Territory. Any family willing to accept this proposition would be welcomed by the new city without holding any grudges from the past. Roland hoped Petrov would convey this message and once again wished for Petrov to act as his ambassador. Petrov accepted with another heartfelt gesture of placing his hand on his chest. As he was about to leave, Roland called out to him, commending his handling of the witch matter and suggesting that there was no need for concealment in the future. Roland then stretched his arms and headed outside. Entering the garden, Roland sensed something unusual. The trees and plants were too full of life. At first, he thought he was mistaken, but as he ventured deeper, he noticed the olive tree branches bowing down, seemingly paying their respects to him. The grass at his feet leaned to one side as if greeting him. He thought he was tripping. In the center of the garden, Roland stopped in surprise. At the end of the path, there stood a quaint room constructed entirely of plants. A small bonfire burned in the center, and Wendy greeted Roland. Tilly informed Roland that Leaf's abilities had evolved. Leaf had become one with the plants. A wave of concern washed over Roland, fearing that Leaf might not be able to revert to her original form. However, Leaf's voice soon resonated, assuring him, as long as she deactivate her ability, she can return to her normal state. She seemed quite pleased and explained that she could sense every change within the garden. As she spoke, a large rolled-up leaf descended from above, gently unfurling beside Roland to reveal a cup filled with a purple-red liquid. The cup was crafted from overlapping olive leaves. Leaf's abilities had evolved during her regular care of the new crops. When asked if she could extend her power throughout the entire hidden forest, Leaf responded that it would take a long time. Expanding her control would slow her cognition. She could gradually extend her power, possibly covering the entire hidden forest in several years. However, attempting to do so instantaneously might cause her to lose her consciousness. Wendy congratulated Roland on having another revolved witch in the Union. According to Agatha's words, they now equaled half the size of the Federation. Roland smiled and then looked at the little girl sneakily peeking at him from the side. Wendy said that they still need to continue testing Paper's ability, but she noticed an odd phenomenon. She snapped her fingers, and 2 bundles of snow quickly fell from the roof. She then instructed Paper to apply her ability. Roland noticed that the snow close to the bonfire quickly turned into a puddle of water, while the one further away only melted halfway. Wendy picked up the melted water and walked to the wall, knocking on it. Tightly wrapped vines retracted, revealing a hole, and the cold wind from outside rushed in immediately. She asked Paper to use her ability again. To Roland's astonishment, the water in the leaves froze into a thin layer of ice. At first, Roland speculated that it might be a manipulation of time. Still, he quickly dismissed that theory, reasoning that time is just a concept created by humans for convenience and doesn't inherently exist. Wendy dangled a stone in front of Paper using a vine, making it sway like a pendulum. Paper used her ability again, but the pendulum's movement remained unchanged. It swung at the same amplitude. Roland realized that Paper was influencing the motion of particles, either slowing them down or speeding them up. Of course, Paper might not understand this herself, she just released her ability based on her sensations. If Roland guessed correctly, her ability was like a natural catalyst. If Paper's ability stabilizes, Border Town might witness a new peak. Just then, a melodious bell tolled from the northwest direction. It was a warning of the demonic beast attack. Nightingale suddenly appeared and rushed over. Roland told her to be careful. Perhaps on this snowy day, only witches were feeling restless, especially the combat witches Tilly brought. They were probably waiting for those mixed-breed demonic beasts that could scale the walls, eager to showcase their skills. Ever since she learned about it, Nightingale had taken an interest, rushing to the scene whenever the alarm rang, probably to see who was the strongest combat witch. Combat witches had their fun, but the support witches were missing out. Maybe it was time to create some new entertainment. With that thought, he summoned Soraya. The beautiful artist, who had made significant contributions to Border Town, looked spirited, her face radiant with a youthful exuberance she couldn't hide. Such a fulfilling life made Soraya very happy, and she was even happier that she could use her abilities to help Roland. Roland was deeply moved by her smile. He called for Soraya this time to design new playing cards. He knew that everyone had grown tired of Gwent. Pulling out a blank paper, Roland quickly sketched the rough design. He explained that there would be 4 suits, numbered 1 to 13, with an added king and queen card, making a total of 54 cards. Soraya's abilities had come a long way, and using the sketch as a reference, she quickly painted the cards with a coating. Roland told Soraya that there were many ways to play with these cards and asked her to bring Anna and the others. He would teach them how to play. Ferlin stood behind his wife, watching her with a gentle smile as she meticulously chose goods from the stall. At moments like this, Eileen's gaze was always exceptionally serious. Ferlin thought all pieces of meat were priced by weight, so it didn't matter which piece she picked. However, Eileen insisted that while Ferlin liked lean meat, without a bit of fat, the dish wouldn't be fragrant when cooked. So, she had to choose carefully. Ferlin couldn't help but chuckle, telling her to keep selecting as he'd go buy some wheat. Ever since the snowfall, Prince Roland had set up windbreak shelters around the market. There were also notices proclaiming that sales would continue even in winter. This meant that throughout the daunting month of the demons, the town would still offer a steady food supply. People in line recognized Ferlin and even offered him their spots. However, Ferlin showed his gratitude but took his place at the end of the line. A middle-aged man ahead chuckled, commenting that Ferlin truly lived up to his reputation as the once-renowned first knight of the Western Territory. Ferlin was taken aback. He hadn't expected the man to know of his past. The man laughed, saying it was no secret. His children adored Ferlin, with his eldest son even aspiring to be a knight one day. Ferlin smiled, and then realized that perhaps, in the future, His Highness wouldn't need knights anymore. When Ferlin was the Duke's knight, most commoners wouldn't dare meet his gaze, let alone having a conversation with him. After his defeat and capture, bringing him to this border town, he had assumed he would merely serve under a different lord. Yet, to his surprise, he eventually became a teacher, imparting knowledge to commoners, and during his time being a teacher, he earned people's respect. This respect felt entirely different from his knightly days. People no longer avoided or distanced themselves. Instead, they hoped to draw closer to him. Perhaps, he mused, he wasn't meant to be a knight after all. Soon, it was his turn in line. Behind the counter stood a girl, one of the first students he had taught. He was pleased to see his former student now working at the town hall. A look of delight spread across her face after seeing Ferlin. They then exchanged some words. Not wishing to delay others, Ferlin purchased a batch of wheat, hoisted the sack over his shoulder, and stepped aside. Just then, a flash of blue caught his eye. A stunning woman with rare blue hair and delicate features. Ferlin felt as though his blood had frozen, not because of her extraordinary beauty, but because he recognized her. He had seen her likeness in his family's grand hall. And a large portrait of her was hanged in the grand hall. If his memory served him right, she was depicted as the founder of his family lineage. Eileen's voice pulled him from his disarrayed thoughts, and he responded distractedly. Back home, the image of the woman continued to haunt him. Why, he wondered, had he seen an ancestor of his family in the town? After much contemplation, he decided to return to the Changji stronghold. He knew too well that having left his family, he shouldn't set foot in the family territory again. But he knew he had to tell this to his father. Upon arriving, to Furlan's astonishment, the first to greet him was his younger brother, Miso. Noticing Furlan was alone without any attendants, Miso tauntingly asked if Furlan had returned to ask for money. Furlan calmly replied that he wasn't there for money and had no intentions of contesting for the heir's position. Furlan said he have a comfortable life being a teacher in the border town. When Miso heard that Furlan was teaching commoners in the border town, he dismissed it as a fabricated tale. Miso even went so far as to insult Eileen. Suddenly, a stern voice echoed from behind, causing Miso to flinch. Furlan turned to find the voice and was met with the gaze of his own father. The nobleman stated firmly that Lady Eileen was in no way inferior to any noble. Miso needed to be respectful. Without sparing another glance at his younger son, the nobleman instructed Furlan to join him in the study. Furlan followed his father to the mansion's second-floor study room. As they passed through the grand hall, Furlan's eyes were instinctively drawn to the wall adorned with portraits, and once again, he was met with the visage of the blue-haired woman. Upon entering the room, the nobleman started by mentioning the recent successful performance at the theater. He had seen Furlan's wife, and it seemed they were leading a good life. Furlan felt a sudden warmth in his eyes, touched that his father had begun the conversation with this topic. Furlan shared that they had made a home in the border town and intended to start a family after this year's month of the demons. Furlan took a deep breath. Furlan composed himself and spoke of the woman he had encountered in the border town, remarking on her uncanny resemblance to the woman in the portrait in the grand hall. The nobleman's hand trembled, nearly knocking over his teacup. He looked up, eyes widening. Furlan theorized that the woman might be a descendant of the person in the painting. However, the nobleman immediately shook his head, insisting that it was impossible for her to have descendants. Furlan, conceding, lowered his gaze, suggesting he might have been mistaken. After a moment of thought, the nobleman voiced that while she couldn't be a descendant, she might very well be the person from the painting herself. Furlan could hardly believe what he was hearing. The idea was even more incredulous than his own. A person living for over 4 centuries? The nobleman recounted how Furlan, as a child, would frequently go into the basement and would often receive a beating for it. It wasn't that the nobleman wanted to be strict, it was because the basement housed a precious heirloom of their founder ancestors. Following his father into the basement. The walls were lined with stones of god punishment, and opening one chest revealed it to be full of magic stones. It was only then that the nobleman confessed their family lineage was built under the protection of a witch. Their ancestor, in the times of Lady Agatha, had led a group to the tower in the hidden forest. Among them was their housekeeper. He should have accompanied his master, Lady Agatha. But he had faltered, instead opting to stay behind and oversee their supplies. In some sense, his act was akin to betrayal. After reaching the Western Territory, he was consumed by deep regret and self-blame, and documented these feelings. The witch never returned, and their ancestors severed ties with the Federation. From the very beginning, the nobleman knew that everything the church did was wrong, but he was powerless to stop it. The most he could do was ensure that if a witch ever appeared in his territory, he would protect and hide her. Their ancestors, over several generations, had done the same. Furlan was puzzled as to why the nobleman believed the ancestor might still be alive. The nobleman explained that witches possessed a myriad of powers and were unable to bear offspring, leading him to believe that she might be still alive. The hidden forest was treacherously dangerous. Even witches could not safely return from it. For ordinary person to venture there was tantamount to courting death. However, in his last will, their ancestor had noted this, expressing hope that future generations could journey to the stone tower in the hidden forest, even if just to catch a glimpse. Furlan opened this long-forgotten journal, and from the very first page, he could feel the remorse imbued within every line. Much of the writing had faded over time, becoming nearly illegible. He took his time and eventually he reached the last page, where the contents of the will were written. Perhaps it wasn't so much a will as it was an unfulfilled wish. The nobleman decided to bring the journal along to meet the Lady Furlan had spoke of.